Does Peter's vision in Acts 10 prove that God abolished his food laws in the Old Testament? Dr. Jason Staples challenges antinomian readings of Acts 10 and offers a better interpretation. Hey guys, if you've been following my channel for long, you know that I am passionate about solid biblical scholarship. I rely heavily on scholarly books and papers in my own work, and I love exposing people to good scholarship. You also know that I am obsessed with seeing Jesus and the apostles within the Judaism of their time, and how, contrary to popular opinion, the New Testament authors affirm the ongoing relevance of the Torah, the law of Moses. Neither Jesus nor the apostles stopped keeping the law or did away with it. So in this series, I want to highlight recent scholarship on the law of Moses in the New Testament. I'll be showing you guys videos and reading excerpts from scholarly papers and books that promote what I like to call a pronomian, that is, a pro-law perspective. There is a ton of great scholarship that has been done in this area that you guys should really be aware of if you are interested in this topic. So today we're going to hear from Dr. Jason Staples. Dr. Staples is a historian, professor, and author of the groundbreaking book, The Idea of Israel in Second Temple Judaism, which I highly recommend. In this video, I'm going to be reading an excerpt from a paper of his that was published in the Journal for the Study of the New Testament. This paper looks at Peter's vision in Acts 10 and how it fits within the overall narrative regarding Gentile inclusion in the Jewish Christian community. Staples argues that the vision needs to be interpreted against the backdrop of earlier Jewish teachings depicting various nations as animals and allegorical explanations of the food laws that were familiar in the Second Temple period. The entire paper is very informative, and I definitely recommend checking it out. I will leave a link to it in the description of this video. I'm going to be reading an excerpt from this paper regarding why the author included Peter's vision in the narrative of Acts 10 and how it relates to the Torah's food laws. Here's what he says. Nevertheless, it is still worth asking why Acts includes the vision at all, given that the events of the Cornelius narrative would seem to work well enough to support the inclusion of Gentiles without the vision. In light of the connection between food/purity regulations and restrictions on fellowship with Gentiles, the payoff may have to do with the matter of full community membership and table fellowship for Gentile believers. That is, should believing Gentiles be incorporated within the community as an intermediate class of righteous persons without full equality with Jews, or may they be incorporated with equal status? This question is closely related to matters of ritual purity and food legislation. In this respect, several subtle details of the vision are important, most notably that Peter is not instructed to violate Torah restrictions and eat unclean animals, as is often assumed. Instead, the sheet contains a mixed group of all kinds of animals, and Peter's protest in Acts 10:15 implies two categories, the common and unclean or impure, though he treats them as equally inappropriate for consumption. Most scholars have followed Peter's judgment in conflating these two categories, concluding that to call something common is another way to speak of impurity. Thus, there seems to be no real distinction between the terms here. But these two terms tend to refer to separate domains defined by the opposing categories of pure/impure, or clean/unclean on the one hand, and holy/common on the other. The categories do overlap in that ritual purity is a prerequisite for encountering the sacred, and as such, impure food cannot be holy, but clean food can be either common or holy. The potential combinations are as follows: unclean/common, clean/common, and clean/holy. And here, Dr. Staples provides this visual to help us understand the domains of purity and holiness. Staples continues, sacrificial food is both clean and holy, but an ordinary, non-sacred meal for Jewish laypersons by definition falls into the clean/common category, though the Pharisees and some other groups seem to have extended the purity expectations required for sacrificial, clean/holy food to ordinary, clean/common food, effectively treating that food as though it were holy. Meat from a clean animal could also be rendered illicit through idol sacrifice, and the result of eating such defiled food would be to make oneself common, as opposed to holy, effectively eliminating one's distinction from the idolatrous nations. Such language of profanation in connection with idolatry, along with similar terminological overlap with the moral category, seems to have contributed to the especially scrupulous decision to reject common food in favor of that regarded as having a higher degree of sacredness. As such, some refrained from eating not only with the uncircumcised, but with fellow Jews whose tithing practices they deemed inadequate. Indeed, Peter's rejection of the common as equivalent to unclean is precisely what the heavenly voice rebukes, declaring, "What God has purified, do not call common." This is quite different from an admonition against reckoning what has been cleansed as unclean, which would be an outright contradiction, and as such would seem less likely to occur. Modern scholarly conflation of the two categories in this passage is especially ironic in this light, as interpreters have straightforwardly shared Peter's assumptions rather than heeding the heavenly voice. By the end of the narrative, Peter, having been thrice admonished by the heavenly voice, no longer lumps the two concepts together as in 10:14, common and unclean, but rather distinguishes them as two disparate categories, common or unclean. Applied in this context, the vision simultaneously addresses the question of Gentile incorporation via a common visionary symbolic trope and a question of diet that would potentially keep uncircumcised believers from having full access to table fellowship. With respect to diet, what was previously regarded as common and therefore potentially dubious should be received without concern, obviating concerns about common, albeit clean, food that might otherwise rule out eating with the uncircumcised for those especially scrupulous about such matters. The vision therefore makes an important supplementary point in the context of the larger narrative. Whereas God's act of giving the Spirit even upon the uncircumcised is retrospective and irrefutable proof that those who receive the Spirit have been purified, the fact of their purification does not directly address their status on the common/holy scale, a question not directly answered in the surrounding narrative. The vision, however, supplies that answer. Those whom God has cleansed, God has also sanctified. If God has cleansed the uncircumcised, they are not only pure, but have also been reckoned holy, and are therefore worthy of full fellowship and incorporation with the rest of the ecclesia. We can therefore conclude that although Acts could have chosen to address the questions of Gentile inclusion and dietary restrictions more directly, Peter's vision fits well within the standard symbolic space of apocalyptic/visionary Jewish texts known from this period and earlier. This is not a case of Acts shoehorning a vision about one thing, food, into a wholly other meaning, Gentiles. Rather, Acts makes use of a trope common to the Jewish visionary tradition to simultaneously make a fine-grained point about both Gentile inclusion in the community and table fellowship with said Gentiles. In the process, Acts 10 sets the table for the final apostolic decision of Acts 15, which does not abrogate food laws for Jews, but rather establishes full table fellowship with those Gentiles whose hearts have been cleansed. Such Gentiles are no longer to be regarded as common or potentially polluting. God has made them both clean and holy. So obviously I really like Dr. Staples' interpretation of Peter's vision in Acts 10. What I find especially insightful is the fact that, contrary to popular assumptions, the voice in Peter's vision did not actually command Peter to eat animals that are akathartos, or unclean. He was telling Peter to eat the animals that are koinos, or common. Peter thought that he could not eat the clean animals in the sheep because they were together with the unclean animals. He thought that the clean animals had become koinos, or defiled. God was telling him that these animals were clean according to the Torah, and that the extra-biblical restrictions on food should not hinder table fellowship with Gentiles. There is nothing in this text that does away with or abrogates the Torah's food laws. Hey everyone, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Scholars on Scripture. Be sure to subscribe to see more content like this, and I'll see you next time.